Welcome to HMA Indonesia webinar series. I'm a Events Coordinator at the British Chamber of Commerce in Indonesia. Today, HMA is really proud to host a special Q&A session with the British Ambassador to Indonesia and Timor-Leste, Her Majesty's Ambassador Owen Jenkins. And this session will be moderated by our chairman, Anne Sliman. Before we start, allow me to review the functionality of the Zoom webinar. So today's session is being recorded, and we will share the link with you after the event is complete when it's available. And all dial-in participants will be muted to avoid background noises that may distract you from listening to the webinar, and also to enable our speaker to present without interruption. And we have also activated the Q&A box, so if you have any questions, just type your question into the box at any time. It is at the bottom center of your screen, and we will have time to answer your question later. So now, without further ado, I'm going to hand the floor over to Anne Sliman, who is going to start today's webinar. Please, Anne Sliman.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all well. It's unusual for us to do an event on a Friday evening, but it seems that during these days, one day blends into another. I'm sorry we're a little bit late in starting, and contrary to popular rumor, I was not in Eastern Promise. I was at home. We just had a couple of technical hitches. I'm very grateful for Owen Jenkins, our ambassador, to be able to join us this afternoon. Owen and I last spoke a couple of weeks ago, and at that point in time, I think the embassy was up to its eyes in trying to deal with a lot of UK tourists and people in Bali who needed to return home to the UK. And that was really a 24-hour operation for them for maybe a couple of weeks. Now, after checking the hotel occupancy in Bali, which is almost zero, I think that task has largely been completed, or I hope it's been completed. So what I'd like to do today is just to give Owen an opportunity to update us on the embassy functions. A lot of us in our businesses are running with our business continuity plans. I'm sure the embassy as well is trying to get back to normal as best as it can. And he will also give us some insights into how he sees the situation here. I've also seen that many of you have questions about some of the specific support you might expect from the embassy, or you think you would expect from the embassy, and I'm sure Owen will be happy to answer some of your questions in that respect. I think I'd like to start it off by also, sorry, I forgot to mention, from London, we also have Joe Derbyshire, who heads up DIT. He's also on the call, so if there's any questions specific to DIT, I'm sure Joe will be happy to answer them. So that's just to continue on. I think it would be quite good if you could just give us an update as to where things are with the embassy in terms of the functions, which ones are back to normal as best they can, and how you really see things.
Sure, thanks very much, Ainsley. Thanks, Asti, for the introduction. Very happy to kick off with that and then answer whatever questions there are. And thank you to everybody who's already sent in quite a few questions. I've tried to prepare answers to the more technical ones, but we can go through them as we talk. I won't talk for too long because I'm keen to get to the things that you actually want to hear. But in terms of where the embassy is, so as Ainsley said, we've been, like many of you, through a pretty intense period of work. In our case, that started off in mid-March, which is when we changed our travel advice for Indonesia to advice for all British nationals visiting Indonesia to avoid all but essential travel to Indonesia. You might need to be back in the UK over the next few months. Flights are getting harder to find. They're closing down. I think May will be even tougher on that front. And the epidemic has yet to peak in Indonesia. So there will be strain on healthcare here. And do think hard about your own circumstances and what that means for you. In terms of what the embassy is up to, so we're open. Like many public places, we are We're not open for visits in person, except in absolutely extraordinary circumstances. But all of our services are being delivered remotely, online, or on the phone. And we continue to provide the full range of services, both to British nationals through our consular section, and also to British businesses, where the Department for International Trade is wholly focused on ensuring that in these extraordinary new circumstances, which are causing a lot of challenges to British businesses as well as to British nationals, we're providing all the support we can to British business to keep going and to find opportunities where they are in the new environment. So we're here, we're open. I'm still in Jakarta. I get asked that a lot, and intend to be here for the duration. That's probably enough by way of introduction. So Ainsley, back to you to tell me how you want to handle the Q&A.
Just to everyone listening, if there was some parts you caught and you're not quite sure about and you want to ask questions, just put them on the Q&A. One area where we've had a lot of questions relates to spouses, Indonesian spouses, and actually the very generous offer, I think, of the UK government to allow them to go back to the UK if they were obviously being accompanied by their husband or wife, a UK citizen. Where people have questions is apparently the visa office is closed down, the one where we would go in Kunigin for the visas, and people are a little bit unclear how to process the paperwork. So there's a question here from Daniel Choate, for example, really asking for an introduction to a senior UK VI representative who can potentially look to address many of these matters. Would you like to touch on that and just explain what the rules are in terms of spouses and what the procedures are, particularly if the VFS office is closed?
Yeah. So, Daniel, I'm sorry you've been having trouble getting the answers out of UK VI, and I'm happy to make that introduction if I can't answer the question now. If there are specific questions which you need sort of technical answers to, then pass them through to me as well, and I can certainly commit to getting you answers. But I'll outline now what the basic structure is. So the offer which Ainsley referred to is basically a compassionate exemption, a compassionate visa waiver for non-British national dependents. So Indonesian spouses would be one example of that, but not the only one. And it's there because there's a recognition that with the visa application centre closed to visitors, it's not possible for people to go through the usual processes. So what's needed by UKVI to process that, and so I'm reading off another screen as I do this, is that the information that needs to come in is the details of the family group members, evidence of the relationship with the British national, for accompanying children, so birth certificates, marriage certificates if available, or other evidence, and evidence for compelling compassionate circumstances. And on the basis of that, people can travel to the UK and will get a stamp in their passports at the UK border, which will be valid for 6 months. After that 6 months, at the moment, visas are being extended if people are unable to leave. That's happening up until the 31st of May. Beyond that, UKVI will take a decision nearer the time, given how uncertain things are. Obviously, people would have the right to apply for settlement at that basis if they qualify for that at that point, at the point when 6 months is up. Sorry, I'm smiling at the latest question. So I've lost my train of thought. So that's the situation. Daniel, I don't know if that answers your question, but happy to facilitate a conversation with UKVI to make sure that any more detailed questions are followed up. I'm not in the stationery cupboard. This is actually slightly foreshortened by the camera study in my residence. I will try and get a better backdrop for next time, but that's where I am.
Not a lot of countries have done that, so I think it's a good gesture from the UK, and one that's very welcome.
And we've also kept our borders open, which a lot of other countries haven't.
That's right. Now, just in terms, quite a lot. Obviously, a lot of business people will be staying here. They've got a lot of responsibilities, either for their companies, and a lot of our members actually run SMEs that they own. So it's their own businesses here in Indonesia, and a lot of them are asking, really, what's your take on the real situation on the ground? I know it's a very difficult question because you ask two different people, you get two different responses quite a lot of the time, and it depends on the region. But if you could give any insights, and also we've had a number of questions about advice on medical facilities to maybe be directed to in the event that they need to go to a medical facility. If you get any sort of updates on that or guidance on that, I think it would be quite useful for people.
Sure. Let me say what I can. I mean, as you say, Ainsley, trying to talk about what the situation is, let alone predict how it will develop, is real crystal ball stuff, and I think incredibly difficult to do at the moment. Obviously, Indonesia is facing the challenge which countries around the world are facing of a rising epidemic of a virus whose behaviour we don't completely understand, but it's clear that it is more infectious than most of the seasonal flus and other seasonal viruses that we've seen, and it appears to have a higher mortality rate, though that's still being studied, and the asymptomatic rate in particular is deeply unknown. Different governments have reached for different sets of policy tools to handle this, varying between absolutely complete lockdowns in some places to more managed approaches elsewhere. The Indonesian government has reached for a variety of measures in the same way as other governments, including the social distancing, which we're seeing in Jakarta and the neighbouring districts, but also fiscal stimulus packages to make sure the economy is not overly affected by the social distancing. So we're seeing the official figures, which you're all seeing, which outline the progress of the epidemic. Most strikingly, I think, was the announcement, I think earlier this week, possibly at the end of last week, that there were now cases in all 34 of Indonesia's provinces. So clearly what we're seeing is community transmission, that this is happening across the archipelago at different rates and at different times in different parts of Indonesia, because the geography means that it's a more spread out epidemic. But we don't see any reason why the epidemic will look dramatically different here to elsewhere. Obviously, the Indonesian measures to manage it will be an important part of suppressing the peak, and that's very welcome. But it will be a difficult thing for the Indonesian government to manage here as well. On the economic side, I think the Indonesian government has introduced a number of measures. The ones that we think are particularly important are obviously, firstly, the fiscal loosening, which has allowed for the other measures to take place, and the Bank of Indonesia's willingness to finance some of that. And secondly, the measures which have been taken to provide income support and other forms of support to the most vulnerable in society and those with lowest incomes, because it's those who are the most vulnerable to the epidemic itself. So the income support, the support on utilities, and the support for food supplies, I think, have been particularly important. How it will develop over the next few months, your guess is as good as mine. My crystal ball is broken on that particular point, but I think it will be. There's no reason to think it will develop particularly differently here to elsewhere. Ainsley, in terms of your question about medical support, we don't have a medical team here at the embassy, so we don't have particular insight. We do publish on the website, as part of our consular service, a list of medical facilities with whom we've been in touch and providing the information that they've provided to us. That's not a validation. We rely on the same medical facilities here as the rest of you, but that list is available on the website. I can pass the details to Chris to circulate if that's of use.
Another question that's come up is on if things get significantly worse, whether it be from the virus perspective or any social unrest, are there likely to be any evacuation flights? Now, I remember the UK did its first evacuation flight, I think on January 31st from Wuhan, when the infection incidence in Hubei province is similar to what it is in Jakarta right now in terms of infections per million people. So what people are asking is, are there any criteria whereby yourself or the UK government would start to trigger evacuation flights? We know the Germans have done quite a few. Different countries have taken different views on this. Is there any policy or sets of criteria that people should be aware of? And aligned to that, I assume that you would want as many UK nationals as possible to at least register their presence with you. I know a lot of people don't do that. And again, maybe an update on what they should be doing there. If they are concerned and there might be a move to take people back home, presumably you would want to know who's around and how to contact them.
Yeah, so let me take those points. There isn't actually a registration process. The UK government decided a few years ago now that the registration process we had was not working, that people either didn't register or didn't deregister when they left. So it was actually causing more trouble than it was helping when we needed to use it in crisis situations. So for the recent consular emergency, we've been getting people's data sort of in real time so that we can direct them towards the right flights rather than relying on registers which are completely out of date. If that changes, it will be flagged in our travel advice as well. Sorry, the other part of your question, Ainsley.
It's more the criteria. I mean, I think there's some
evacuation
flights from India, Peru, China. You know, why some countries and not others? I think.
So the government took a decision a couple of weeks ago now to commit £75 million to providing repatriation flights from around the world. There are two criteria for these. The first is around the countries which are served by these are countries which no longer have commercial means of exit. So that's why places like Pakistan, India and the Philippines have been served by these flights. Where there are commercial routes still running, we are not running these patriation flights, which is why there are no plans at the moment for flights out of Indonesia, because there are still commercial routes running, particularly Qatar and Garuda for now, though as I said at the start, I think May will see those shut down. The second point to make is that though the flights that we're laying on at the moment, the repatriation flights, are for travellers and tourists, not for residents. So there is a UK address test which is being applied on those flights from India, Pakistan and elsewhere. So that's the other important thing to note. The flights are being run on a commercial basis. So there are fixed prices depending on what the flying time is. So for flights over 10 hours, I think the price has been £800, and then going down depending on reducing flight times from there. So at the moment, no plans for flights from Indonesia. The relatively small number of British travellers left here would mean that we'd have to look at the numbers who actually still wanted to leave if we did stop having commercial flights here. But for as long as there are commercial flights, I don't think, well, at the moment on current policy, there wouldn't be any repatriation flights laid on by the government.
Okay. A couple of our Britcham board directors are back in the UK, and one of them's asked, and I don't think you can answer this question, will the UK government be able to provide any kind of assurance regarding when it's safe to return? Well, it's difficult to forecast what's going to happen. It's going to be difficult to provide any kind of assurance, I assume.
No, but it's a good question, Gary. I mean, I think what we would try and do that through travel advice. So in the same way that we increase the level of our travel advice to advise British nationals to avoid non-essential travel here, in the same way, if we saw those triggers winding back, we would update our travel advice so that it was at a lower level. And I hope that would be a clear signal. The triggers that we'd be watching are the ones that you would expect, and they're the ones that are described in the travel advice. So obviously the progress of the epidemic, the presence of availability of flights and the likelihood of those continuing, the risk to health services, where we talk about strain in the travel advice, and also obviously we are watching those questions around social unrest, which I know a lot of you are interested in. Obviously at the moment things are pretty calm. We're not seeing increased evidence of crime or social unrest on a sort of sustained or systemic level. There's always incidents in any country, but we're not seeing that happening. And we would also look at the Indonesian government's requirements for entry and exit from Indonesia and try and reflect those as well. Though obviously the Indonesian government itself is the right source of advice on those, but we try and at least give people an idea in the travel advice of what that looked like. So that's how we would try and give that signal for when it was safe to come back to Indonesia, or when at least our travel advice would shift in that direction. Do we have contingency plans? I mean, I think I've covered under the repatriation flights. If the social situation, if the security situation changed dramatically, that might change too. But that's the position at the moment.
In terms of social unrest, I mean, a big mitigating factor would be the ability of the Indonesian government to execute its economic stimulus package in terms of providing that support to the lower income earners. 3 million announced. Have you got any insights as to how that is being executed and how effective it's been?
Not huge ones, to be honest. I think it's being managed well. I think that there are well-established mechanisms for getting support to particular sectors of society. In any operation of that scale, there will be challenges, and we've seen some of those reflected in the media. But it doesn't seem to us that those are systemic problems. It's a huge scale of operation, and I think managing it across the whole archipelago is difficult. But it does seem to us to be working. I mean, I think it's worth noting that the total fiscal stimulus so far, which the Indonesian government's committed, is relatively low in comparison to other governments. So there is scope for expansion potentially, particularly given the comfortable position Indonesia is in on its debt to GDP ratio. So there are opportunities to increase it, I think, if the Indonesian government chose to do that. At the moment, we're not seeing any signs of ineffectiveness in those programs.
Okay. In terms of the economic impact, we heard a couple of things today that, for example, maybe the Ministry of Education may have its budget cut because funds will be required to support the economic stimulus package. Are you hearing anything from your conversations with Indonesian government officials as to which ministries may be adversely impacted, see programs cut, or is that too early at this point in time?
No, I mean we are hearing that sort of thing. I mean it's sometimes hard to discriminate between what's a cut and what's a redirection of effort. I mean I think the Indonesian government, like all governments, is sort of reorientating and repurposing a lot of what it does already towards facing the COVID threat. And we're seeing that obviously in the state-owned enterprises ministry. We're seeing it in the defence ministry, in education, obviously in health, in home affairs. There's a lot of repurposing going on and a lot of refocusing of those budgets on the task force and its requirements. So I think all of the key ministries are seeing that refocusing. That will, I'm sure, mean reductions over time in their business as usual, and that's the same for the British government too. We're on a very small scale here in the embassy. We're trying to refocus the partnership programs that we had on trying to build and support Indonesia's own efforts to combat the epidemic. So we will see reductions, I think, in some of the business as usual programs which those departments are running. So while I think it's not too early to say that's what's happening, I can't yet give specificity on what business as usual programs will be really reduced as a result of that.
Okay. I mean, in situations like this, there's always opportunities. And again, in terms of your conversations with the government officials, if I look back to the US-China trade dispute and the way that countries like Vietnam, to a certain extent Thailand, made the most of that by securing a lot of relocation and manufacturing. Do you think Indonesia may have learned its lessons from not being able to do much at that point in time? Are you hearing anything about them maybe being more aggressive in trying to attract investment in the future and offering more incentives to foreign companies? Any of these discussions going on at the moment?
They are. I mean, I think Indonesia does see that, and I think that it recognises that in the medium term, that's going to have to be part of the recovery plan. I think we saw in the middle of March some measures to lift regulatory burdens on small and medium enterprises, both as a way of reducing the COVID burden, but also with a view to increasing the possibility of investment, including from overseas. Those ideas, I think, are still very much in people's minds, and I think Pak Luhut, as the investment supremo, is looking at that as well, and his staff. So I think those thoughts are still going on. I think that obviously a lot of work on the detail is on pause because so much of the Indonesian administration, as governments elsewhere, is rightly focused on tackling COVID itself. But I'm sure that thought is still there. I mean, obviously, what we're seeing now, which we didn't see at the time of the trade war, is a very significant suppression of demand, and that is a challenge for investors as well as for commerce more generally. But I think the idea that is where they want to get back to is still very much alive in the conversations that I've had.
And both countries and companies are looking at realigning their supply chains to de-risk it, particularly those that were very dependent on sourcing from one or two locations. This might be a question you might want to pass on to Joel, but are we seeing any new opportunities for UK companies as a result of discussions about realigning supply chains?
I think in terms of answering Ainsley's question, the answer is we definitely think there's opportunity. It's probably the one question that the DIT Secretary of State is asking the most of at the moment. I think we're kind of hearing anecdotal stories. So, for example, we've heard in terms of stuff coming in and out of the country, immigration staff are particularly suspect of anything that's coming from China in terms of goods and services. And they're basically turning stuff back. So I think that there definitely will be opportunities. Whether the UK can come in and fill what is supplied by China, I think is a slightly different question. And I think in most cases, the answer to that will be no. But yes, in terms of the supply chain and looking for opportunities, we are in the process of starting to reach out and look for that. And if companies want to provide intelligence or feed into us, we'd be very interested in terms of identifying companies, UK companies that could help fill that void, we'd be very keen to do that. I mean, that's part of what we're set up to do.
Okay, I mean, a follow-up question to that, Joel or Owen, is I understand that DIT in the region under Natalie Black has set up an economic response team, which comprises, I don't know, experts and maybe some industry figures. Thus far, there hasn't been any real communication, as I understand it, with the chambers across Southeast Asia. Can you maybe explain a little bit more about that economic response team, its function?
Sure. I'll pick that up. So in terms of the communication with the chambers, we recognise that's a gap. I know that Natalie has drafted a letter. I don't know if it's been sent yet to all the different chambers, but if it hasn't, it's about to land in someone's inbox. In terms of what that economic response team does, I think it's a slightly bit of a red herring. So that team was created for two reasons. One, because of the crisis, and there were a lot of country posts that couldn't respond to requests that were coming in, so we could provide some extra resource, and also to try and get on the front foot, because a lot of countries can't do any proactive work or any responsive work. So this is basically a working level group of DIT officials. So just to give you a sense of some of the things that we've been doing, one of the things that we've been doing is sourcing medical devices for the NHS across APAC. So we've identified around 100 ventilators. We've got around 500,000 worth of PPE equipment, and we've also trying to find test kits. I think part of the challenge has been around trying to find equipment that meets the NHS requirements, but that's one of the things that this particular group's been doing. The other thing that we've started to do, and we'll be speaking to chambers about this shortly, is what's been talked about on the call is some of the issues that are kind of being asked across the market. So things like healthcare, travel advice, the different economic incentives that are being introduced by different countries. So one of the things that we are planning to do is to collate all of that information together in one place. So if you're a British company and you want to compare what Indonesia is doing to Thailand, for example, we're planning to create an online repository. And if any interest or lead is generated from that, we will be passing those leads on to the chamber, which could potentially lead to new memberships, or it could also potentially provide webinar interest if that might be useful. The other thing that we're looking very, very closely at is the impact on COVID in the sector. So as you said, Ainsley, there are lots of opportunities as well as risks. So we are trying to understand at both a regional level and a country level what those are. So just to give you a sense, I've been talking to some of the people on this call about some of the market access issues that have popped up as a result of COVID-19, and how we might do some government lobbying to help reduce some of those issues. And also we've got the ongoing joint trade review, so that could potentially be an opportunity to raise some of these points as well. We're looking at things like things that are coming up in the news. So for example, this morning, there was an announcement from the Indonesians saying that all routine medical care should be put on hold, and they're encouraging more use of telemedicine. So one of the things that we've been talking about this morning is what is the UK's offer in this space, and how can we get that in front of potential buyers. We're also really interested in things like UK export finance. The last Asia recession, UKF demand went through the roof. That is because when there is a recession or when there's an economic decline, a lot of finances pull out, but UK export finance remains in market. And we've got around £3 billion allocated to Indonesia. We've got Richard and Michael, who's in market and still in Bali. And we see potential growth in that sector. And then the other thing that we're doing is just trying to understand on a sector basis what this means for different sectors. So in the embassy, we don't focus on every sector, we focus on particular sectors. And those are the sectors where we think there is the biggest demand for goods and services. So obviously COVID-19 will have an impact on some of those areas, like potentially infrastructure. So should we stop what we're doing or decrease what we're doing and start focusing on other areas like technology?
I tend to agree with you. I would have thought infrastructure might be one of the sectors that might suffer a little bit, not just government public spending, but a number of the companies involved in infrastructure may be struggling a little bit if I look at some of their financials. We've had a lot of interest in technology, whether it be from the education side, the healthcare side. I think there's an awful lot the UK could be doing in that sector. So I'm quite excited about that. We just need to get it out there and in front of people. There are a lot of good companies, and there's a lot of good stuff in healthcare in the UK, whether it be with big data, offline, online health checks, all the rest of it. There's an awful lot of good stuff there.
There is, I agree. And one of the things that I can do with after this call, Ainsley, is share with you kind of a list of companies that we think can really offer Indonesia COVID-19 expertise, because we're trying to now think about how we can offer that up. On the tech side, I know that there's a COVID-19 tech force group, which I think the chairman of OVO sits on, and our digital regional lead is talking to him, and so is Natalie Black next week. So when we find out more about that, we'll share that too.
I see one of your colleagues, Jonathan Wijaya, is just anyone who's involved in a prosperity program, they can sleep well tonight because all the programs continue.
They do. As I said, we are repurposing some of them so that they're relevant to what the Indonesian government needs now, and I'm really pleased that we're doing that. And a huge amount to the global effort around vaccines, health and sanitation, and other things which are relevant to the epidemic, some of which will also land in Indonesia. So a positive story to tell here. But yes, we are continuing to do what we were trying to do before.
Yeah. I'm conscious of the time. I think I told you I would ask for 30 to 45 minutes of your time, so our time is up. Is there anything you'd like to add before we finish?
Well, thank you, Ainsley, and thank you for organising this. I mean, I'm happy to do another one like this or in other formats if that's useful. As I said at the start, and as you indicated, Ainsley, we are as an embassy moving into a different phase. We're keen to maintain the connection with the British community here. Many of you are deeply embedded in society and know it much better than we do. So we're keen to keep up that conversation and we can. Do keep tracking our travel advice, I would say. That is our primary means for getting the sorts of triggers and warnings across to people when they're needed, as well as hopefully in slower time better news. And do think about your own circumstances and where it's right for you to be right now, given the balance of personal, professional, and other issues which we all have facing us. And just finally, again, thanks for organising, and stay safe and stay well. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We might get together in another couple of weeks for a late Friday afternoon chat. We've got a few follow-ups there, particularly on the spousal visas, which we'll get right on. Obviously, a lot of people have questions there. Also like to thank Joe for his input, and we look forward to hearing from Natalie Black. Joe, that's your follow-up, I think. I'll take a big note of that.
No, it's coming. I've seen a lot. I've seen better.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't realise they'd been sent. Okay.
Okay, so thanks very much. Thanks a lot, Owen. Very good, and we'll certainly keep in touch.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ainsley.
Nice
Thanks,
weekend.
everyone.
Stay safe, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.